The wind cuts through wire like memory through flesh. Dawn breaks cold over Stalag 7, casting long shadows between the wooden barracks where 43 women wait for a war to end. They do not yet know it already has. Flight Lieutenant Sarah Whitmore presses her face against the frost-glazed window. Her breath fogs the glass as she traces the outline of smoke columns rising from the eastern horizon. For months, those columns have grown thicker, darker, creeping closer like storm clouds gathering strength. "Still think it's our boys retreating?" whispers Captain Elena Kozlova, her Russian accent barely audible. The question hangs in the freezing air between them, heavy with doubt. Neither woman dares voice aloud. Sarah's fingers find the faded photograph tucked in her uniform pocket. Her squadron, smiling beside their Spitfire. 3 of those faces are dead now. 2 more captured with her when their bomber went down over occupied France. The Reich told them their comrades were starving, their homeland crumbling under German might. The lie felt easier to believe than the alternative dot beyond the perimeter. Guard towers stretch into gray morning mist. Machine gun barrels track the movement of prisoners like mechanical vultures. But something has changed in recent weeks. The sentries no longer stand as straight. Their boots no longer march with the same precision. Fear has crept into their voices when they think no one is listening. The guards are younger now, observes Dr. Marie Dubois, her French physician's training, making her catalog every detail. Boys, some can't be more than 16. The women have learned to read the signs. Rations growing smaller. Coal deliveries arriving less frequently. The commandant's morning inspections becoming perfunctory, distracted. Even the propaganda films shown in the mess hall seem desperate now. All soaring eagles and thousand-year promises that ring hollow against the distant rumble of artillery. Sarah pulls her threadbare coat tighter. 3 years of captivity have taught her patience, but also observation. The smoke on the horizon moves closer each day. The thunder that wakes them at night grows louder. And deep in her chest, a dangerous hope begins to stir. The kind that could drive a prisoner mad if nurtured too carefully. "Something's coming," she whispers to the frosted glass. Behind her, 39 other women pretend to sleep while wrestling with the same terrible possibility. That everything they've been told about German victories, Allied defeats, the inevitable triumph of the Reich might be nothing more than smoke and mirrors. As fragile as the ice crystals melting against the window. The Heinkel came from nowhere. One moment, Flight Lieutenant Sarah Whitmore was navigating her Wellington bomber through scattered clouds above the French countryside. The next, cannon fire was tearing through aluminum and flesh, turning her aircraft into a falling coffin wrapped in flames. "Bail out! Bail out!" The pilot's voice cut through screaming engines and rushing wind. Sarah's hands moved by training, not thought, releasing her harness, grabbing her parachute, diving through the escape hatch into 30,000 feet of empty air. The silk deployed with a violent jerk that saved her life and sealed her fate. She landed hard in a potato field outside Reims. Her ankle twisted, her uniform torn. French farmers found her first, their eyes mixing compassion with terror. They had minutes, maybe less, before German patrols arrived. A handful of bread pressed into her hands. A whispered, "Bon chance," before they melted back into the shadows. Leaving her alone with her choices, Sarah chose to run. For 6 days, she moved through forests and abandoned farmhouses, drinking from streams, sleeping in haystacks. The resistance found her on the 7th night, or perhaps she found them. A woman named Celeste, no older than 25, with eyes like winter steel and hands that never stopped moving. "You're the bomber pilot," Celeste said in accented English. Not a question, a statement of fact that carried weight beyond words. For 3 weeks, Sarah lived in cellars and hidden rooms, watching Celeste's network move supplies, information, and hope through occupied territory. She learned that resistance wasn't just about sabotage. It was about preserving truth in a world built on lies. About remembering who you were when the enemy tried to remake you in their image. The betrayal came from within. A baker named Henry, desperate to save his captured son, sold Sarah's location for the promise of mercy that never came. The SS arrived at dawn, boots on cobblestones, doors splintering under rifle butts. Sarah had 30 seconds to destroy the radio codes hidden in her boot heel before they dragged her into the street where Celeste already knelt in the mud, blood streaming from her temple. The English pilot, Sus Oberfuhrer Klaus Richter, examined Sarah like a specimen. "You will tell us about your squadron, your targets, your friends in the shadows." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "Name, rank, and serial number. That's all you get." They shot Celeste first, a single bullet to make their point. The woman who had risked everything to shelter her crumpled to the stones, her winter steel eyes reflecting nothing but sky. The interrogation lasted 3 days. Electric shocks, ice water, questions repeated until they lost all meaning. But Sarah had learned something from Celeste. That truth was a choice you made every moment, even when it cost everything. Captain Elena Kozlova arrived at the camp 2 months later, her own story written in scars and silence. Shot down over Stalingrad while flying night bombing missions in her POW, captured during the siege. Transported west when the German lines began to buckle. Dr. Maris Dubois came last, caught while treating wounded partisans in a field hospital outside. Lion. Each woman carried her own version of the same story: service, capture, and the grinding machinery of a system designed to break them. But something unexpected happened in the camp. Instead of breaking, they began to hold each other up. Sarah taught Elena to speak English. Elena taught Marie to navigate prison politics. Marie taught them both to read the medical signs of malnutrition and hypothermia. In their fellow prisoners, they became more than survivors. They became witnesses. The projector clicks to life in the darkness, casting shadows that dance across 43 upturned faces. Tonight's entertainment: Der Ewige Jude, the Eternal Jew, a film designed to educate, to inform, to reshape reality one frame at a time. Commandant Friedrich Weber stands beside the screen, his uniform pressed to perfection, despite the camp's declining conditions. "You will understand," he announces to the assembled prisoners, "why your nations chose poorly in this war." Sarah Whitmore stares at the propaganda unfolding before her. Caricatures masquerading as truth, statistics twisted into weapons, images selected to manufacture consent for the unthinkable. But what disturbs her most isn't the film itself. It's the systematic way information flows through the camp, creating a reality that exists nowhere but in their captors' minds. Every morning brings fresh dispatches from the outside world. Germany's industrial production reaches new heights. The Atlantic Wall remains impenetrable. American forces suffer devastating casualties in the Pacific. The Reich scientists work on wonder weapons that will end the war within months. The news arrives through carefully controlled channels. A German radio broadcast during morning assembly. Newspapers, always weeks old, always selectively edited, passed around the barracks. Letters from home that somehow always confirm the narrative of Allied desperation and German triumph. "My brother writes from London," whispers Private Jenny Ashworth, clutching a letter that arrived 3 months late. "Says the bombing there never stops. Says they're rationing everything now, even water." Dr. Marie Dubois frowns as she examines the letter's postmark. Something doesn't align. The paper feels wrong. The ink seems too fresh. But she keeps her observations to herself, unwilling to destroy what might be Jenny's last connection to home. The camp's information ecosystem operates like a closed circuit. Facts enter only through German filters. Questions are discouraged through systematic punishment. Doubt becomes a luxury none of them can afford when survival depends on compliance. Elena Kozlova recognizes the system from her homeland. "In Russia, we called it maskirovka," she explains quietly during their evening walk around the perimeter. "The art of deception. But this is different. They're not just hiding truth, they're manufacturing it." The weekly cinema screenings become exercises in psychological archaeology. The women learn to read between the frames, to catalog what isn't being shown. Why do the German soldiers in these films look so young? Why are the victory parades shot from such careful angles? Why does the narrator's voice grow more shrill with each passing month? But challenging the narrative requires risking everything. Prisoner Wilhelm Hoffmann, a German communist, captured fighting with French resistance. Questions one too many official statistics during a political education session. He disappears that night. The guards claim he was transferred to another camp. His belongings remain in his bunk for 3 days before being redistributed. The message rings clear. Doubt is treason. Questions are weakness. Truth is whatever the Reich declares it to be. So the women adapt. They learn to parse official statements for hidden meanings, to read guard behavior like weather patterns, to distinguish between propaganda and reality through subtle signs the system cannot fully control. When rations shrink, they're told it's to share in the homeland's sacrifice for final victory. When coal deliveries stop, it's because resources must be directed to the Eastern Front's great offensive. When younger guards replace experienced soldiers, it's explained as a rotation to spread combat experience. Each lie requires another to support it. Each deception demands greater suspension of disbelief. The fortress of falsehood grows, more elaborate, even as its foundations crack under the weight of contradictions. Sarah begins keeping a secret journal, scratched into the underside of her bunk with a nail file. Not a record of daily events, but of discrepancies, of questions that don't align with answers, of a reality that seems increasingly detached from the world beyond the wire. February 15th, 1944. She writes in letters so small they're nearly invisible. Guard mentioned his son was killed at Anzio, but yesterday's briefing claimed German forces there were advancing. The entries accumulate like evidence in a trial that hasn't yet begun, a trial where the defendants are their own beliefs, and the verdict might cost them the last shred of certainty they possess. Dr. Dubois notices the subtle changes first. How guards avoid eye contact during roll call. How the commandant's morning speeches grow shorter, more routine. How silence fills the spaces where confident proclamations once echoed. They're scared, she realizes one evening, watching Weber pace his office through the window. They know something we don't. Or perhaps they know something we're starting to suspect. Asterisk. The thunder starts before dawn, rolling across the Polish countryside like distant freight trains carrying cargo that never stops moving. Sarah Whitmore feels it in her bones first, a vibration that makes her teeth ache and sets her heart racing with primitive recognition. This is not weather. This is war, and it's coming closer. Count the seconds between flash and sound, Elena whispers from the next bunk. Her pilot's training still sharp after 3 years of captivity. Under 10 kilometers now, getting closer every night. The artillery has been audible for weeks, but tonight something fundamental has changed. The horizon glows red like a forge, painting the barracks walls in colors that speak of cities burning. The women press against frosted windows, watching light dance across clouds, heavy with ash and smoke. Guard Corporal Heinrich Müller stumbles past their barracks, his boots unsteady on frozen ground. Sarah catches fragments of his muttered conversation with the sentry. 3 divisions. Completely surrounded. Orders to retreat. Retreat. The word hangs in the air like incense from a forbidden ritual. At morning roll call, Commandant Weber's uniform looks slept in. His hand shakes slightly as he reads from prepared statements about strategic repositioning and tactical advantages. But his eyes dart constantly toward the eastern horizon, where smoke columns now rise like ancient monuments to defeat. The Reich's forces continue their methodical withdrawal to more advantageous positions, Weber announces, his voice carrying the mechanical precision of a man reading his own obituary. Enemy advances are temporary and costly. Victory remains certain. The words fall flat against the thunder that punctuates every sentence. Dr. Marie Dubois catalogues the changes with clinical precision. Sleep deprivation in the guards' faces. Increased alcohol consumption. She can smell it on their breath during inspections. Reduced supervision as personnel are reassigned to critical sectors that are never identified. They're evacuating non-essential staff, she reports during their daily medical rounds. The camp dentist left yesterday. The postal clerk hasn't been seen in 4 days. We're being managed by a skeleton crew of soldiers who'd rather be anywhere else. The information blackout becomes more complete and more desperate. Radio broadcasts are limited to musical programs punctuated by increasingly abstract victory announcements. Newspapers stop arriving altogether. Letters from home cease with no explanation, but silence carries its own intelligence. The absence of news becomes news itself. Alina recognizes the pattern from her service at Stalingrad. When command stops communicating, she explains while they sort through increasingly meager rations. It means they don't know what to communicate. Chaos moves faster than information. The night Hamburg burns, the sky turns orange for 3 hours. Even the guards stop pretending the light comes from somewhere else. They stand in small groups, smoking cigarettes and speaking in hushed German that needs no translation. Prisoner transport schedules become erratic. Trains that were supposed to arrive with fresh captives never appear. Convoys meant to transfer inmates to other facilities are canceled without explanation. The camp begins to feel less like a prison and more like a ship slowly taking on water. We're being abandoned, Sarah realizes, watching Weber pace his office late one night. They're going to leave us here and run. The revelation brings both hope and terror. Liberation might be days away, but so might starvation, exposure, or worse. The guards grow increasingly unpredictable as their world collapses around them. Some become more cruel, lashing out at prisoners as if captivity can somehow restore their sense of control. Others grow distant, withdrawn, already mentally preparing for whatever comes after defeat. Young Corporal Hans Richter, barely 18 and visibly homesick, begins leaving extra bread in the women's barracks. Not from kindness, Sarah suspects, but from a desperate need to perform some small act of humanity before the reckoning arrives. "My village," he whispers one evening while distributing rations. "It's gone now. Nothing left but craters and memories." The personal becomes political. The abstract becomes immediate. The Reich's 1,000-year vision dissolves into individual stories of loss, displacement, and the terrible mathematics of modern warfare. The bombing of Dresden lights up the western sky for 2 full nights. Even 60 kilometers away, they can see the fires burning, can smell the smoke that carries the ash of libraries, museums, and tens of thousands of civilians whose only crime was geography. Weber stops holding morning briefings after that, stops pretending there's anything left to brief them about. The thunder grows closer each night. 20 kilometers, 15, 10. Close enough now to distinguish individual artillery pieces. Close enough to hear the mechanical grinding of tank treads on frozen ground. And then, on a morning when the thunder had become a roar, the gates finally opened, not to German guards conducting their daily routines, but to something none of the prisoners had quite dared to imagine. The silence arrives first. After months of distant thunder growing steadily closer, the artillery suddenly stops, leaving behind a quiet so complete it seems to ring in their ears like tinnitus. Sarah Whitmore stands at the barracks window, watching smoke drift lazily from the abandoned guard towers. No sentries pace the perimeter. No dogs bark at the wire. Even the camp's German shepherd, Max, sits motionless beside the empty gatehouse, as if waiting for orders that will never come. "They left during the night," Elena observes, her voice barely above a whisper. "All of them." The discovery unfolds in stages. First, the unlocked gates, standing open like an invitation to a world they'd almost forgotten existed. Then the abandoned command post, papers scattered across Weber's desk, half-finished coffee growing cold in chipped porcelain cups. The women emerge from their barracks, like survivors of some natural disaster, blinking in sunlight that suddenly seems brighter, more real than it has in years. Freedom tastes like dust and possibility. But liberation, when it finally arrives, comes in a form none of them expected. The rumble starts low, mechanical, growing steadily louder until it resolves into the unmistakable growl of tank engines. American tank engines. The sound carries a different rhythm than German armor. More relaxed, almost casual, like musicians who know they're playing the winning song. The first Sherman rolls through the camp. Gates at exactly 11:47 a.m. Its crew compartment open. A young sergeant standing in the hatch with his helmet pushed back and a cigarette dangling from his lips. He looks impossibly young, impossibly confident, impossibly American. Well, I'll be damned. Sergeant Johnny Martinez calls out in accented English that sounds like music after years of harsh German commands. Y'all speak English in there? Sarah steps forward, her legs unsteady with emotions she can't name. Flight Lieutenant Sarah Whitmore, Royal Air Force, serial number 445,291. Martinez grins, a wide, easy smile that belongs to someone who's never doubted which side was going to win this war. Well, Lieutenant, looks like you can retire that serial number. War's over for you folks. What happens next shatters every assumption the women have carried about their captor's version of reality. The American soldiers don't look like the desperate, starving, demoralized troops described in German propaganda. They look well-fed, well-equipped, and supremely confident. Their uniforms are clean. Their weapons are modern. Their vehicles run smoothly and show no signs of the material shortages that had plagued the camp for months. But it's the small things that destroy the last foundations of the Reich's carefully constructed lies. Private Tommy Chun hops down from the tank's hull, reaches into his jacket, and produces something that makes several of the women gasp audibly. A glass bottle, green-tinted, with distinctive flowing script etched into its surface. Coca-Cola. Any of you ladies thirsty? Chun asks, using his helmet to pop off the cap. The bottle hisses as carbonated pressure escapes. A sound so ordinary, so civilian, so impossibly American that it seems to belong to a different universe entirely. Dr. Marie. Du Bois stares at the bottle as if it were some alien artifact. For 3 years, German propaganda had painted a picture of American society collapsing under the weight of rationing, industrial breakdown, and social chaos. Yet here stands a soldier casually offering them a luxury product, manufactured thousands of miles away and transported to the middle of war-torn Europe as if it were the most natural thing in the world, where ... Marie begins, then stops. The question feels too large for words. Where'd this come from? Chen laughs. Oh, we got a whole truck full of them. Company policy. Wherever American boys go, Coke follows. Got bottling plants set up everywhere from England to Italy. This one probably came from the factory we set up in Naples last year. The casual mention of American industrial capacity operating freely across liberated Europe hits the women like a physical blow. Not just surviving, thriving. Not just maintaining basic military functions, but manufacturing consumer luxuries and distributing them to frontline troops as a matter of routine. Alina accepts a bottle with trembling hands. The first sip explodes across her taste buds, sweet, acidic, entirely foreign. But what overwhelms her isn't the flavor. It's the realization of what this simple drink represents. Industrial surplus. Supply chain mastery. A nation so confident in its victory that it can afford to ship carbonated beverages to combat zones. Everything the Reich had told them about American weakness revealed as transparent fabrication. How many? Sarah asks quietly. How many what? Martinez replies, genuinely confused. How many soldiers? How many tanks? How many factories? How many bottles of Coca-Cola? Martinez's grin widens. Lady, we got so many tanks we're running out of places to park them. Got so many planes we're using them for mail delivery. Got so many Cokes we're giving them away to prisoners in Polish POW camps. The abundance is casual, mentioned without pride or boasting, simply stated as fact. America hadn't just won the war. It had won it so completely that victory had become boring, routine, a manufacturing problem rather than a military challenge. Private Chun notices the women's stunned expressions. Hey, you folks okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. We have, Sarah whispers. taking another sip of Coca-Cola and tasting the collapse of everything she'd believed about the balance of global power. We've seen the ghost of the 1,000-year Reich. The bottle feels warm in her hands, warmed by spring sunlight, by hope, by the simple recognition that she has survived to see the truth behind 3 years of carefully constructed lies. Asterisk. But that bottle of Coca-Cola represented more than just American confidence. It was the visible tip of an industrial iceberg that would reshape their understanding of how modern wars were truly won and lost. Asterisk, the numbers are impossible to believe. Even when Technical Sergeant William Harper writes them on a chalkboard salvaged from the camp's abandoned schoolroom. 64 bottling plants, he explains to the assembled former prisoners, his Chicago accent cutting through the afternoon air. That's how many Coca-Cola facilities we built in the European theater alone, from Iceland to North Africa, each one producing roughly 50,000 bottles per day. Sarah Whitmore performs the mental arithmetic and feels her worldview shift again. 3 million bottles daily. Just in Europe. Just one product. From a company that had been operating as a private contractor, supporting military morale operations. Harper continues his impromptu lecture, clearly relishing his role as educator. See, somebody figured out early that keeping soldiers happy was just as important as keeping them armed. Maybe more important. Happy soldiers fight better, complain less, and write better letters home. So we didn't just ship Coke. We shipped the entire industrial process to make Coke. The women listen with the intensity of students cramming for final exams. After years of information starvation, these casual revelations about American logistics feel like feast courses. The Germans, Harper observes, unwrapping a stick of chewing gum with casual precision. They never understood that war isn't just about tanks and bullets. It's about supply chains, about industrial capacity, about being able to manufacture not just what you need, but what you want. Dr. Marie Dubois raises her hand like a schoolgirl. How many factories? In America, how many were converted for war production? Harper's laugh sounds genuinely surprised. Lady, we didn't convert factories for war production. We built new ones. Kept the old ones running consumer goods. Ford was making B-24 bombers at Willow Run while still producing cars at the River Rouge plant. General Motors built tanks and kept building Chevrolets. We had shortages of some things, rubber, tin, certain metals, but we never stopped being America. The concept seems almost fantastical. A nation simultaneously fighting a global war and maintaining civilian production. Manufacturing both bomber aircraft and carbonated beverages, shipping both artillery shells and confectionery to combat zones. Elena Kozlova struggles with the mathematics of it all. In Russia, we converted every factory. Every resource went to war production. We made T-34s in tractor plants. We made ammunition in textile mills. Everything civilian stopped. Different philosophies, Harper explains, settling into his role as informal ambassador of American industrial culture. Y'all figured you had to choose between guns and butter. We figured out how to make more of both. The conversation shifts when Harper produces a battered Life magazine from his pack, February 1945 issue. Just 3 months old. The cover story, American Prosperity in Wartime. Photographs of suburban shopping districts, fully stocked department stores, families gathered around dinner tables laden with food. This was taken while we were fighting in the Ardennes, Harper explains, flipping through pages of advertisements for automobiles, household appliances, and luxury goods. While German civilians were eating turnips and burning furniture for heat, American families were complaining about rationing that limited them to 3 pounds of coffee per month. The psychological impact proves almost harder to process than the physical liberation. For years, German propaganda had sustained morale by painting America as a society on the brink of collapse. Industrial production crippled, civilian population desperate, military forces held together by desperation rather than strength. The reality revealed through Harper's casual stories paints a picture of abundance. So complete, borders on the absurd. ice cream factories operating at full capacity, baseball leagues continuing their seasons with only minor modifications, Hollywood producing entertainment films alongside training documentaries, a nation fighting a global war as if it were a minor inconvenience to normal business operations. The Coca-Cola thing, Harper continues. That was just smart business. Company president met with General Eisenhower in '42, told him Coke could follow American forces anywhere, set up bottling operations in 48 hours, and provide familiar taste of home to boost morale. Ike thought it was brilliant, gave them priority shipping space and military protection for their facilities. Private Chun joins the conversation, carrying a wooden crate filled with various American products, chocolate bars, chewing gum, cigarettes, magazines, toiletries, items that had been luxuries in peacetime Europe, now distributed casually to combat troops as standard equipment. Best part, Chun adds, setting down the crate with a grunt, is the Germans never figured it out. They kept bombing our military targets while we kept moving our real advantages. Bombed the airfields while we built new ones overnight. Targeted our tank factories while we converted automobile plants to produce twice as many. They played checkers while we played chess. The women examined the products with scientific fascination. Each item tells a story of industrial capacity, supply chain management, and economic resilience that their captors had systematically underestimated. Hershey's chocolate bar manufactured in Pennsylvania. Wrigley's gum produced in Chicago. Lucky Strike cigarettes from North Carolina, all transported thousands of miles through submarine-infested waters, past enemy air attacks over bombed-out infrastructure, to reach a liberated POW camp in Poland as part of routine morale operations. We weren't just fighting a war, Harper reflects, watching the women process these revelations. We were proving a point about what kind of society could sustain global conflict without losing its essential character. Turned out democracy and free markets made pretty good weapon systems. Sarah examines a recent copy of Time magazine, its pages filled with advertisements for consumer goods, job opportunities, and university programs. The magazine's casual assumption that readers possess disposable income, career options, and educational aspirations strikes her as almost surreal after years of captivity in an increasingly desperate Reich. This whole time, she murmurs, while we thought you were struggling to survive, you were debating whether to buy Fords or Chevrolets. But understanding the machinery of American victory was only the beginning. For these women, the real reckoning would come in the quiet years that followed, when they tried to make sense of what they had witnessed and what it meant for the world they would inherit. 18 years after liberation, Sarah Whitmore sits in a BBC studio, her hair now touched with gray, her hands steady as she holds the same photograph she carried through 3 years of captivity. The interviewer, a young man who barely remembers the war, leans forward with the earnest intensity of someone trying to capture history before it slips away. What moment, he asks, would you say marked the end of the war for you personally? Sarah's answer comes without hesitation. The sound of a Coca-Cola bottle opening. April 15th, 1945, 11:52 a.m. That's when I knew we'd been living in a house of mirrors for 3 years. The interview is part of a larger documentary project. Voices from the Wire, an attempt to catalog the experiences of Allied POWs and their understanding of how the war's outcome had been determined. Sarah's story has become representative of a broader theme, the collapse of belief in the face of undeniable evidence. The propaganda wasn't just about facts, she explains, her voice carrying the measured authority of someone who has spent nearly 2 decades processing these memories. It was about creating a complete alternate reality. We lived inside that reality, breathed it, made decisions based on it, and then, in a single moment, it all evaporated. Dr. Marie Dubois, now working as a psychiatrist specializing in trauma recovery, appears via recorded interview from her clinic in Paris. Her perspective has been shaped by years of treating former prisoners and concentration camp survivors. What we experienced wasn't unique She explains to the camera. The Reich constructed an entire universe of parallel facts. Every piece of information that entered our world had been filtered, edited, or fabricated to support their narrative. We became prisoners not just of wire and guards, but of false consciousness. The documentary includes archival footage that would have seemed impossible to the women during their captivity. American factory workers producing both military equipment and consumer goods simultaneously. Cargo ships carrying both ammunition and luxury items across the Atlantic. Suburban neighborhoods where families discussed rationing coupons over dinners that would have been feasts in wartime Europe. Alina Kozlova, interviewed at her home in Moscow, where she now works as an aviation instructor, provides the Soviet perspective on American industrial capacity. "We knew Americans were strong," she says in accented English that still carries traces of her pilot's precision. "But we thought they were strong the way we were strong, through sacrifice, through giving up everything for victory. We never imagined they could be strong through abundance." The film cuts to contemporary interviews with some of the American soldiers who participated in the liberation. Sergeant Martinez, now a high school principal in San Antonio, laughs when asked about the Coca-Cola incident. "Honestly, we didn't think it was such a big deal," he admits. "We had Coke everywhere we went. Hell, we had ice cream trucks following our armored divisions through France. To us, that wasn't proof of industrial superiority. That was just Tuesday." Private Chun, now an engineer working on America's space program, provides technical insight into the logistics that had seemed so miraculous to the liberated prisoners. "The bottling plants were just one example," he explains. "We had mobile laundries, field kitchens that could feed thousands, workshops that could rebuild tank engines from scratch. We brought America with us wherever we went." The documentary explores the psychological aftermath of such revelations. How do you rebuild your understanding of the world when everything you believed proves to be constructed from lies? How do you trust information again when you've lived inside such a complete deception? Sarah's post-war career provides one answer. She became a journalist specializing in media analysis and propaganda detection. Her first book, The Coca-Cola Moment, Truth in an Age of Manufactured Reality, became required reading in journalism schools across Britain. "The war taught me that reality is fragile," she writes in the book's introduction. "It can be distorted, hidden, or replaced entirely if we're not vigilant. But it also taught me that truth has a weight to it, a substance. Eventually, reality asserts itself against even the most sophisticated lies." The BBC interviewer presses her on the broader implications. "Do you think such systematic deception could happen again? In peacetime? In democratic societies?" Sarah's pause suggests she's considered this question many times. The tools for manufacturing consent have only grown more sophisticated since 1945. Television, advertising, public relations. These are just more refined versions of what we experienced in that camp. The difference is that now we have choices. We can seek out different sources. We can ask questions. We can demand evidence. But we have to choose to do those things, she adds quietly. Freedom of information isn't automatic. It's something you have to actively pursue. The documentary's final segment returns to the physical site of Stalag 7, now overgrown with weeds and saplings. The barracks have collapsed. The guard towers have been dismantled. Only concrete foundations remain to mark where 43 women learned that everything they believed about the balance of global power had been carefully constructed fiction. Sarah stands at the spot where she once pressed her face against frosted glass, watching smoke rise from the eastern horizon. Now she watches her grandchildren play among the ruins, their laughter echoing across a landscape that once contained so much fear and uncertainty. "Sometimes I wonder," she reflects in voiceover, "what would have happened if we'd never been liberated? If we continued living inside that manufactured reality, would we have eventually convinced ourselves it was true? Or would reality have leaked through anyway, one Coca-Cola bottle at a time?" The film ends with archival footage of the liberation. American soldiers distributing soft drinks to bewildered prisoners while tank crews casually discuss baseball scores over military radios. The mundane and the miraculous intertwined in a moment that revealed the careful illusions of empire dissolving in the face of industrial truth. The final words belong to Dr. Dubois. We learned that freedom isn't just about being released from physical captivity. It's about being released from the prison of false information, about having access to reality, however uncomfortable that reality might be. Sometimes, the most revolutionary act is simply knowing what's actually happening in the world. The credits roll over images of empty Coca-Cola bottles, now museum artifacts, catching afternoon sunlight in display cases that preserve the moment when carbonated truth dissolved the foundations of the thousand-year Reich. Sarah Whitmore, now in her 80s, tends roses in her London garden. On a small table beside her chair sits a Coca-Cola bottle, not one of the museum pieces, but a contemporary bottle from the local shop. Still green-tinted glass, still bearing the familiar script, still capable of producing that distinctive hiss when opened. She picks up the bottle, holding it to the light, and for just a moment she's 25 again, standing in a liberated POW camp, tasting freedom in the form of carbonated syrup and realizing that everything she believed about the war had been built on foundations as fragile as the ice crystals melting against a barracks window. The bottle catches the sunlight, refracting truth through glass, holding the memory of the moment when illusion shattered and the real world, complex, abundant, and utterly different from propaganda's promises, finally revealed itself.